Okay, so welcome everyone to Tale of a JavaFX UI, a play in 3 acts, which is actually going to be taking place today, thanks to the efforts of the tech people helping me get a HDMI cable. That was nerve-wracking. I'll be your narrator for this evening. My name is Ford-Reitz. I am a software developer at the company BREDEX, which is a software development and consulting company in northern Germany. And part of what I do there is acting as a committer on the Jubilee project, which is automated functional testing of UIs. So although Jubilee and JavaFX are interesting together, that's kind of another topic. Today's program is going to be more about how do I build, or what can I do combining JavaFX with Eclipse E4. And so the idea is to quickly build a very simple application with, first of all, in Act 1, a UI is born. We just have some kind of a UI that we can see. The text fields are there, the buttons are there, and what have you. We're using SceneBuilder and E4 to put that together. Act 2, it's alive. We'll add some data binding so that you can see that that stuff that gets entered into the text fields actually goes into the model object, also a very simple model object. And the final act, more than just a pretty face, we'll add in some usability and I call them delight factor tweaks, just to kind of make the application, as simple as it may be, sort of more enjoyable to use. For that, we'll be using CSS and JavaFX transition. So the setup that I'm using, it's funny because we were just talking about this earlier because we were thinking I might need to use another laptop, and some people were offering. I'm using Eclipse Luna 441, EFX Eclipse 1.0. That's tooling and runtime for creating JavaFX applications. The main guy behind that being Tom Schindel. I'm also using E4 tools for working with the E4 workbench model. Java 8, which I highly recommend over the JavaFX and Java 7. There's some additional stability, there's some additional API for working with CSS. It's just, in general, a more convenient and enjoyable experience. Using JavaFX SceneBuilder 2.0, a GUI builder for JavaFX from Oracle, and I have already got a target platform set up, which is basically just the target platform provided by EFX Clipse. Don't really need much more than that. Oops. So, that being said, switch into the workspace, which would normally be empty if I didn't have the target platform, a local copy of my target platform in my workspace, and a backup plan in case things go horribly, horribly wrong. So the way I would start that off, if I say I want to build this simple application using, as you can see, I've already done it today. So EFX Clipse contributes some wizards, and one of them is the extremely useful, especially in my case, E4 application projects. So I will create those projects. I'm not terrifically original, so I'll just call it foo, and the product name is also foo. I'm not really focused on building, not really focused on packaging. Those things I can ignore for now. I'm just going to be running from Eclipse. So I let that run, and I have 3 new projects, one of which contains my application, the other one a feature that bundles my application together, and a product that bundles that feature together. So the first step that I want to do, because I'm ready to get started on the UI, I go into the application E4 XMI, which lets me build a workbench. And that's basically just some clicking to add a window. And I'm keeping it as simple as I possibly can due to time constraints. just a part within that window directly, no part stack or anything along those lines. So I want to use JavaFX, and I want to be able to get started quickly, so I'm going to be using FXML, which is a way of describing JavaFX UIs using XML. And so I'll make a part that can load FXML. Is that big enough or too big? Is it visible in the back?
Yes.
Is it not too big in the front? Okay, I seem to have hit the sweet spot then, but I will maximize it like that. Now, when I make a new part, E4 automatically assumes I'm using SWT. I am not, so I will just change the type of the parent component so that it matches up with what I'm actually using. I will also inject an FXML loader factory, which is good for, say it with me, loading FXML. Yeah, what's in a name, right? And in order to figure out what FXML file I want to actually load, I'm going to include that information directly on the part. So I've got all the arguments that I need. So I can use my loader factory to, you can either load the FXML file relative to the requesting class or to the requesting bundle. I tend to just load it relative to the bundle. I'm not sure what the usual stuff is, what the recommendation is, but that seems to me to make the most sense. So I say I'm just going to put any FXML files that I want to use right into the foo package, and like I said, I'm going to be getting the name of the FXML file from the part. Not context, properties. That has almost thrown me off a couple times now. So, and I will call that property FXML. Now I've got it loaded up. I'm missing one critical part in order to actually include it in the UI, and that is adding it to the parent component, because otherwise it's just kind of floating out there in nothingness, and no one really knows how to find it. Oh wait, so I actually need to go back here because I haven't actually loaded. I've got a loader factory, and now I can actually do the loading. That's really the interesting part. So now I have a loaded object, and when you load an FXML file with a controller, you have access to the node, the FXML node that gets, not FXML, the JavaFX node that gets created, as well as the controller object that gets loaded. So I'll grab the node. It's an object. I know that it's a node, so I can safely cast that. I need to adjust my imports there, and then the compiler recognizes that that this could throw an I/O exception when loading the FXML. If that happens, then things go boom. I accept that. So I've got this part now that is capable of loading FXML. But as I said earlier, I also need to, since I'm including it in the workbench here, I need to tell it which FXML file to load. So I'm going to be building an application to manage a comic book, or to enter a comic book information like title, issue number, and set the cover. So I'll call it comic FXML. Now, I'm much faster at typing than I am at dragging and dropping. So, also due to time constraints, I have already created an FXML file with SceneBuilder. you can see what that looks like here. It's reasonably simple. You can see here on the left side the layout, the general layout, and here's in the middle is a preview. The code aspect of it is in this controller tab down here, where you can see what the name of the controller class is and which widgets are going to be accessible to my controller. So I know that I'm going to need that controller, so I will create that then. I saw that it's comic controller, and there's nothing especially special about that class. It doesn't need to extend any superclasses or implement any interfaces. Mostly it just happens through dependency injection magic. And kind of an easy way to do that is the sample skeleton in SceneBuilder, where you can just kind of select those out, and then you don't need to worry about making a typo. That will lead to needing to import all kinds of stuff. I'm not using AWT, I'm using JavaFX, still using JavaFX, still using JavaFX. Okay, so now that is understood. I also need to initialize this controller, or I will need to at some point. At the moment it's not as important, but it is important to keep in mind that this method to initialize needs to be called initialize. I've been bitten by that a bunch of times. No, once, but it felt like a bunch of times because it took me so long to figure out why it was. So we have our fxml file. We've got our part that can load fxml, and we should be able to, with a little bit of finger crossing, start the application. And just to save us from problems later, I'm already going to add clean and clear persistent state. I don't know if clear persistent state is still needed or if that's default nowadays, but I feel safer putting it in. So here we have our UI. It's not pretty. It can't even do anything, but it's there. End Act 1. So, thank you. Then comes Act 2. It's alive. We've created a monster. It's ugly and it's not really helping anybody. So I feel a little bit like Frankenstein. So I want to rectify that. So I need to use data binding, or I want to use data binding, Eclipse data binding, if I want to make changes to the UI available in the model. And when I say model, again, I'm talking about the absolute simplest thing I can have. It's not even a bean. It's just a pojo with a couple of attributes. It's got a title. It's got an issue number. And it's got a cover image. That's all it has, and that's all it will have. Make some getters and setters for it. And I can also add some system outs to just kind of be informed if when the data gets written through with data binding. issue number, and title is the last one. Excellent. Okay, I now have a model to write stuff to. That's wonderful. Then I can instantiate that when my view gets created. For Eclipse data binding, you always need a data binding context. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with Eclipse data binding. Awesome. I became kind of a big fan of it a couple of years ago, and it really was nice to be able to transfer the skills over from SWT into JavaFX using Eclipse data binding. So I can have just a general validation status so that I know whether the things that I'm putting in there are actually correct in that data binding context. And I will just take the worst error that I have and display that or recognize that. So like I said, display that makes sense. So I'll add a value change listener to my validation status so that when that gets updated, that is getting out of hand. There we go. So that when that gets updated, I can update the label, because it would be nice to know when there is an error, what the error is. So I just grab the new value and cast it to a status which is not available yet because I need to fix my imports. Since I created it from scratch, I need to make sure that I have a dependency to the data binding stuff that I need.
Would you use Control 1?
Would that work? I'm gonna do that. We'll give it a shot. And was that be fixed? I don't. Where? Lower? That's all I got. So
How would the mouse update?
that would be.
I'm pretty sure.
I think you have to include all Java classes in Java search.
Okay. So core runtime was necessary, and I'm going to be dealing with POJOs, so properties, so that's also going to be necessary. I'm also going to be dealing with CSS later, so I'm going to just get that out of the way now. That's a Java 8 thing, so that's probably why that's not in there by default, because it needs to be Java 7 compatible. So now I have the status, and I can check whether that's, if it's okay, then I can clear the label, and otherwise I'll include the message. Okay, very useful, except not yet, because I need to actually do the binding. So might as well get that out of the way. What did I say I was going to do? Binding, that makes sense. Okay. Trying not to get too far ahead of myself and already into Act 3, because that would be just completely out of order. So the targets, EFX Eclipse has a couple of properties for binding JavaFX widgets. Text fields are nice and easy. And for the model, since I'm not using a bean, I don't have any property change support. I have to stick with Pojo. So the first data binding is done, and actually, nobody saw this. You did not just see copying and pasting, but in the interest of time, you kind of did. So, binding the issue number text field to the issue of the comic book, and finally now there is no property for the image view, the current image of the image view, but it's kind of nicely generified such that you can still grab the property from the JavaFX bean, because all the widgets in JavaFX are also beans. I believe that's, I don't know exactly what it is off the top of my head, so I'll just do it the way that I had been doing it, and that's to grab the property and get the name of that property. And I don't have to worry about getting things exactly right. And then we will also grab the value of the comic model object. He doesn't like that because I didn't observe. That's understandable. Now he likes it much better. So we'll have a look-see at that. That should be something that actually does something, even if it is not, it's still not pretty or especially usable. Namely, as we type in, we can see that if things are valid, if the input is valid, then it gets changed. If it's not, then it doesn't get updated. One thing that we did forget, and by we I mean I, was to add a listener to the set cover button. So that we can actually set the cover image. And that we don't actually need to return anything. So there we would want to open up a file chooser so that we can pick which cover we want to set, and we'll just open that up directly. We need a window, a parent window, which we don't really have, but fortunately we're using E4. We have dependency injection, and by golly, we are going to use it. And there's a very specific order to dependency injection when you mix E4 and JavaFX. Namely, the E4 injections happen first, and then the FXML, or the FXML injections. Always. And that hasn't caused me as much trouble as anything else, just because it's a solid rule. It's something that you can rely on, but you do need to know about it. So, showing that dialog gives us a file. We can check whether that's null, because if it is, then somebody hit cancel. Although, you know what? I'm just not going to hit cancel. I think that's obvious enough that we can skip over that. So, then we create a new image, JavaFX image based on that. And then we can use that to set the image of the image view. So looking at that, we have also a situation where we can pick a comic book cover and know that even though we have a monster, it can possibly still be used for the force of good. But we saw the problem that things are ugly, is that things are working, and therefore end Act 2. Okay. Begin Act 3. More than just a pretty face. So we want to add a little bit of CSS in order to make things nice and purty. I need to add I was forced to make a lot of sacrifices in the name of time, and I do apologize for that. But I think it's more interesting to actually see some of this stuff than to watch me code through it painfully slowly. So, basically I prepared a validation status listener, which will keep tabs of the status of validation status of a binding, and based on that validation status, sets a CSS pseudo class on that widget so that we can present it in some kind of a different way. So let's add that to the one binding that actually has validation in it. Namely the one that has to be an integer. So that adds a CSS pseudo class style to that widget when there's a validation error, which is not terribly impressive yet because we don't actually do anything with that yet. So we'll open up our CSS file. We'll add the xtext nature, why not? And I'm kind of cheating a little bit because this is the FX base is something that's defined in the Modena skin. That's sort of the main CSS for JavaFX at the moment, and it lets you modify multiple properties kind of simultaneously. I just say that the base color for that component should be red. And while I'm at it, I will also add some styling for error message, which is the label at the top that shows the error message has that style class. And here you can see from EFX Eclipse some of the useful tooling here. That I can say, well, I want it to be red, and I want the FX want the font style to be oblique, why not? So now when I run it, and I type in something wrong, oh, yeah. For the amount of time put into it, it's semi-impressive. So that covers the usability aspect of it, and I was talking about the sort of more fancy pants aspect of it. And unfortunately, it looks like I'm not going to have time to show how I did that, but I would still like to show about what it looks like. So even though things didn't go horribly wrong, I am going to be just kind of showing this part. And this is adding a transition, which doesn't take long, but it does take longer than the 3 minutes or 2 minutes that I have. And so I don't know how many people are familiar with kind of older TV shows. See if I get the sound effect right. And that sort of, just for the people who are into the comics and are interested to see it makes it a little bit more fun to use. Not useful, but encouraging to the user. So that brings me to the end, or is it? I'm going to be putting up some sample code, not exactly the sample code that I did just now because it was right quick, but the sample code that I prepared. Probably not time for questions now, probably not time for comments now, but I will wait around outside right afterwards. I would welcome your feedback from on the EclipseCon website. You can give your +1. I think that's the only thing that you can give. And comments, completely welcome. I can also recommend, since I was talking about JavaFX and Jubula, my colleague Marcus is going to be giving a talk tomorrow about exactly that. So that's a nice little tie-in. So thanks so much for your time.